You have reached Deception Detection Radio with Kay from the Deception Detection Network. Please stay on the line while I connect you with the truth. Hi everyone, welcome to Deception Detection. I'm Kay. I pray that you had a blessed week. Tonight's broadcast is part 3 of my exciting series of interviews with author Gary Wayne as he rejoins me to continue our discussion of his book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Gary's been a lifelong contrarian, never getting caught up with popular belief, but instead searching for the truth. These interests have taken him on many fascinating and exciting journeys that have culminated in a 30-year labor of love in his writing of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. I feel very blessed once more to welcome Gary Wayne back to Deception Detection tonight. Welcome, Gary, and thank you again for joining me this week.
Well, thank you for having me back. I'm certainly looking forward to another interesting and hopefully intriguing discussion that I think, well, I'm hoping that we'll talk about some things that, again, the audience has perhaps not thought about or dug deep into, and maybe encourage them to continue to do so with what we're going to talk about tonight.
The book is absolutely fascinating. I've started it, and I want to let everyone know that this book is not only a book that you're going to be able to sit down and read, it's also a book that you're going to use as a reference book. This has so much packed into it that it is a must-have for anyone that has a Christian library in their home, or that they need to have it with their dictionaries, their concordances, because this book contains so much that it's amazing. It is a book that you don't want to put down, and it keeps your brain working. And I'm the type of person that my brain has to constantly be going, and I love to be challenged. And this book answers so many questions, but it also opens up the door to make me want to know more. So I highly recommend it. It is one of the best books that you're ever going to read. I really appreciate the fact that you're on with me, Gary, to be able to get this told, because there are things that I've been reading that I didn't have a clue to, and I've had questions answered. I want to go ahead and say tonight's prayer, and then we're going to get back into the Genesis 6 conspiracy. Okay, are we all set, Gary?
We are all set.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you once again for bringing Gary Wayne to be on with us tonight. Please look over him and our audience and me. Keep that hedge of protection around us. Lord, lead us in tonight's show. Let us say the things that you want us to say, and let us hear what you want us to hear. We thank you so much, Lord, for all your blessings. There are just not enough words to let you know how much we love you and appreciate everything that you do for us. I pray this, Lord, in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Well, last week, Gary, we got into some wonderful topics from your book. Where would you like to go ahead and pick up from tonight?
Well, I think anywhere you want to start. I know you've got a lot of questions, so why don't we just start with one of those areas that you've identified, and let's just sort of build on it from there, because as you know, any question that you begin with, it just leads into 15 or 20 other different doors we could open.
Yes, so. It does. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is about the Shriners. The Shriners, have the circus. They do a lot of things for the children that are sick. They always give out these little paper flowers when they collect money. Are they part of the same society as the Masons?
They are, and they are a very wealthy group of the Masons. So you need to not only be illuminated 33rd degree or higher, and into perhaps the Rosicrucians if they've selected you to go on from being an adept or Illuminati up to a higher level. And so wealthy and very high up, powerful. What their role to do is to show that sort of benevolent, good side that the lower levels tend to show, but these are the powerful ones that are out there and creating it's almost like a distraction, or how would I say, a veil over what's really going underneath. So they do all these great things that people see, and they do. I mean, hospitals and charities and events and circuses and on and on and on and on and on. But understand this is a very select group of the initiated, illuminated Freemasonry group, and likely most of them are Rosicrucians.
Now, we had talked before that when people get to be, depending on which group they're with, whether the third degree or the 33rd degree, that's when they are fully enlightened. But the people that become Masons or the Shriners when they're first starting out, do they have any kind of an idea what they're working toward, or can they get into this innocently?
Well, let's first of all begin with the fact that you have to be invited to become a Freemason. So you just can't go out and join. So they're going to identify people to come in. So there'll be a number of different ways that they might select that. Obviously, ones that they want to have in either through the bloodlines or through wealth, or who are rising in business or rising in politics. There's a number of reasons why they're going to bring them in. But understand that the Freemasonry organization, and it's this way no matter whether you move up into the Illuminati or the Rosicrucians or the Council of 300 or the Family of 13, or if you go back into history to the Knights Templar, these are organizations within organizations. So what we see on the outside is distinctly different than that what is at the core. And so in Freemasonry, they only have one qualification, is that you believe in a God, and they don't care which God.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the time they get you to the 33rd degree, you're going to be initiated into the Luciferian doctrines that their God is Lucifer. But as they ascend sort of that ziggurat of challenges and quests and learning, they're going to learn parts of the secret society and learn more as they go, but they'll also learn when they get to the top that they weren't told the whole thing in terms of what they were being taught all the way up. So there's two different meanings to what they're learning as they go up the ladder. A lot of what people know about Freemasonry is, and the meanings of their rituals and things are for public consumption and do not go to the core of who and what they believe. So everybody has to sort of look at this as an organization that is trying to hide what it's doing under this disguise of good society that does good out there, but what they're really doing is trying to create world government under one religion and bring in the end time and the Antichrist. That's what they're trying to do.
So when they invite someone to join them, they look at them as their ability to strengthen their organization, that they have that already in mind when they go to someone and invite them?
Yeah, they look at them as their soldiers that are out there. So even though the people may not believe they're doing things that are putting the agenda forward, whether it's political or in business or in the media or in entertainment or in whatever sort of commission and area that they're working in, what they're doing for the society is implementing their agenda, even though they may not realize it. And only once they get illuminated do they get told the whole picture in terms of what they were doing, in terms of what you thought you were doing and what you were really doing.
This is kind of a scary thought to me, because you hear so much about the Masons, you see the Shriners, and they are infiltrated into every aspect of society, into the most innocent of places these people are
Yeah,
at.
yeah, and this was by design. And if you go back into history, and with the Freemasonry being created by the Sinclairs and the remnant of the Templars to create sort of this political arm, they came to England in about the 1600s and really started to take hold in about 1660, and through the Stuart crossover from the Tudor kingships when Elizabeth didn't have any heirs. And then they utilized the Empire of Britain to expand Freemasonry groups all around the world. And they also utilized the exiled Stuarts in France later on to send what they would call and start continental Freemasonry into Europe. And so they've used the major empires of that time to get control of the countries, and particularly the developing countries. And with that, they played such a significant role in both the French Revolution, that I think we're probably going to touch on a little bit later, and the American Revolution. And those were heavily organized and inspired by Freemasonry, controlled by the Illuminati, and directed by the Rosicrucians.
That's fascinating. I would like to go back to the Rosicrucians right now. I know it seems like we're going to be jumping around a little bit, but there's just so many questions. Is there a link between the symbol of the Rosicrucians and the Star of David, since it's a pentagram, and having it used during the Holocaust?
Yeah, it's not a pentagram, it's a hexagram. So a pentagram, it has 5 points and a hexagram has 6 points. That doesn't mean it's not connected to the Rosicrucians. It just means that there's two different meanings here. And so the pentagram is a significant symbol of the occult, and if you don't have to go very far to see any of that, just watch any horror movies and satanic movies and you're going to see the pentagram.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a 5-pointed star, and that goes really more back to allegories with Lucifer and Azazel and back to the antediluvian world, and just another sort of door we could open. But we're talking specifically now about the Star of David. So the Star of David is more of a recent iconic symbology that was adopted by the Zionist movement, or the desire to recreate Israel in the Middle East. And so let's say probably around the late 1700s, late 1800s, it began to be adopted by the Jewish people. And of course, everybody remembers in the Holocaust with the Star of David, and so it's really taken on a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
It's got nothing to do with monotheist history whatsoever. Some people call the Star of David the Shield of David.
Yes.
But again, there's nothing there to take it back to David from a monotheist perspective. I understand this is Rosicrucianism symbolism. And you have to understand that in Rosicrucianism, there is a significant part of it that comes out of Jewish mysticism. And of course, from the last show, we know Jewish mysticism as the Essenes. And Essenes were also sort of a sister religion and worked together with mystical Jews, and books like the Kabbalah would document the mystical Jewish faith. So we have to understand that this does have a Jewish history with the symbolism, but not monotheism. It's clearly polytheist doctrine. And in Rosicrucian symbolism, it represents sort of a balance. It represents the equilibrium of spirit and matter together.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the harmony of spirit and matter. And it also represents the arising divinity or godhood concept in polytheism over the soul.
Very New Age-ish.
Very New Age, yeah. And so this is also, when we talk about Jewish mysticism and we talk about Rosicrucianism, we talk about the Essenes, understand this is also the alchemy part of the Rosicrucians. And so you've got sort of those three sort of parts of Rosicrucianism. And it's all this polytheist belief system that in their belief goes back to not only Solomon as being one of the great magi's of their order, but they also believe that will go back to Moses and back to Heliopolis that we talked about in the last show, in the home of Egyptian religion. And the second sort of center and epicenter of mysticism in the post-flood world, remember, it was Nimrod after Babel in Chaldea, and created the wise men and the magi, and you have the Egyptian priests coming out of the city of the sun in Egypt. And they believed Moses was indoctrinated into those beliefs, and he actually carried that in their belief system as the true belief system to Israel, except that it has been polluted by monotheism, as they would look at it, as something coming in to change the true religion. So that's what they believe.
Now, we talked the previous two interviews about the sciences. And one thing that I found very fascinating were the parts that make up those 7 sciences, how they are involved now with controlling society. The music, yes. The alchemy, everything.
Yes, and alchemy, it comes out of 5th science of geometry, and it's a mix of some other blended sciences. It's a philosophy, and it's chemistry, and it's also sort of dictated by a philosophy. And so when we talk about the seven sciences affecting everything, they're all interconnected because they have the same root in the perversion of this knowledge with the descendants of Cain.
Mm-hmm.
And we also talked about philosophy, I believe, in the last show. And philosophy is also, like alchemy, an offshoot of these sciences that was created to further those sciences. And so alchemy is very, very powerful in the Rosicrucian belief system, but understand that philosophy comes from a combination of grammar and rhetoric and dialectics. And so philosophy is the governing ideal, the concept that disciplines all of these other knowledges and directs them and tells them how they're to be implemented. So with music being one of those sciences, again, take it back to the root of the religion and the philosophy and the agenda that's embedded within it. Not that all of these things can't be good things, but just as in the tree of evil, there's always a good side and a bad side. And you have to understand that these groups, all throughout history, have not been working for, in my opinion, the good of humankind.
No. I can actually see it as starting out the seven sciences as a small point. And I can picture it in my mind as spreading out with these tentacles that just totally surround the earth.
Yes, absolutely. And again, even if you look at, and when we get outside the earth, they've got all these other belief systems that we recognize as astrology. And astrology is just a perversion of astronomy. So you can look at everything that they do with the knowledge in a perverted sort of manner. And we're going to see astrology come back in the end time with the signs of the times and signs in the skies, and they're going to bring a complete sort of different interpretation of what that means to cattle herd people in the direction that they want us to go.
Was astrology ever used as something good? I mean, now we look at astrology as far as a Christian perspective, that it is evil, it goes against the Bible. But did they ever use astrology with astronomy for the good? Or has it always been evil?
It's always been partnered with the kingships and the Babylonian antediluvian religion that was married with the kingship. So it's always been manipulated for what they would want to do within their agenda. So probably some good was done with it, but again, in the bigger picture, my answer would be no.
Okay. Well, the next question that I have for you, and this is something that I'd actually heard when it happened. Hitler predicted the next Antichrist, and that the Antichrist appearance would be someone by the name of Maitreya. And back in 2010, there was a man named Benjamin Creme that works with Maitreya. Maitreya is a mogul, and there was a woman named Kathleen Keating, who is an author, that actually met with him, and he is admitted to being the Antichrist. He actually had powers where she saw him appear and disappear in her own backyard. Now, is this
Right.
someone that is just pretending to be Hitler's Maitreya? Or how would Hitler
Sure.
even know about Maitreya?
Right. So what you've just done is opened a Pandora's box.
Oh,
So we want to,
I'm good at that.
so to speak. And of course, Pandora's box is just another allegory of knowledge and ancient knowledge. And again, whether or not we're talking about the Emerald Tablets, those are all the same allegory. But I thought I would use that particular metaphor. So why don't we just, the quick answer is yes, but I want to backstep. Just before I backstep to sort of build what your question is centered on is remember that there will be many false Christs in the end time.
Yes.
Not just one, right? So whether it's the Mahdi of the Hadith in Islam, or it's Lord Maitreya, or the new Buddha, as the Lord Maitreya is also referred to, or any of the other religions that are going to be possibly producing their end time Messiah, they all have an end time Messiah because it's the same belief system and it's sort of the mirror image or the evil twin of the monotheist one. And so they're all talking about the same story, again, from a different belief system and a different outcome at the end. So they will have their Messiah, and we will have our Messiah, which has already come and who's going to come again. But let's just now back up a little bit. And we were talking a little bit about the Rosicrucians and alchemy. And you had introduced Hitler and Lord Maitreya. So let's start connecting some dots. And this may also bring us back to Napoleon as well a little bit
Oh,
later.
okay.
And so there's a very, very famous, non-canonized prophet that gets a lot of recognition and media attention called Nostradamus.
Yes.
Now, Nostradamus was a Rosicrucian and an alchemist. And so you have to understand that all of this is not unrelated. And that statement in itself, based on what we talked about just a few minutes ago with Rosicrucians and Jewish mysticism, all of a sudden starts to connect more dots and ring more bells and sort of get people thinking in a whole bunch of different directions. Notwithstanding the fact that his prophecies are written in such ways that are very, very, very hard to get an absolute sort of meaning, there is a consensus that he did predict three antichrists.
Yes.
And so the three antichrists are believed to be Napoleon, Hitler, and the one to come. And so we've just done now is connected these figures all together and as being related. If we look at what happened in Nazi Germany, they created a new religion, and that religion was Ariosophy. So that's an extension of Theosophy, which is an Eastern religion, which Lord Maitreya comes out of, because it's a Buddhist type of Messiah. And so when we look at Ariosophy, that first part of the word that's tagged on to Theosophy, the AR, comes from Arianism. And it's all about a theosophical Gnostic belief, an Eastern religion belief, but with some significant differences in terms of bringing about the Antichrist. And Hitler thought of himself as an Antichrist figure and a Messiah figure. It also connects back to bloodlines and things that are in the blood. And in Ariosophy, there's a Volkisch concept that is married into that. And between the Volkisch concept and the Aryan concept, they believe their descendants came from before the flood, from giants, and that they were just again reasserting their selves on the earth as they did before. So understand all of this connects back to the antediluvian epoch and thus the Genesis 6 conspiracy. And so we have this mystical religion that was established by Hitler. And Hitler thought of himself as the Messiah. And Hitler also thought about bringing on, through eugenics, the new man. So now we have mysticism, we have an Antichrist type figure, and he's trying to create a new Nephilim, and he wants to create the Third Reich, which is 1,000-year reign by himself, with him atop the new church. So he did not depose Rome. He didn't get a chance to do that, as what the Antichrist did and what Napoleon tried to do. But he would have done that because he would be the Messiah of the new Nordic Aryan church, which is Ariosophy, and there was no room for monotheism because it was a polytheist religion.
Okay.
So when he was dying, he let people know that he was not going to be the one that was going to reign over the world, but there was somebody else coming. And to prepare for the coming of the next Antichrist type figure or the next false Messiah, the next Hitler, and to organize around him. So somehow through his belief system, which would be taught in their belief system, that there would be one more coming, and that time was not that far away. Now, the other part of the Nazi regime is that people don't really know is this was an offshoot also of Freemasonry. And although it became an anti-Semitic type of Freemasonry, it was part of its organizational roots. And so we have the seven sciences and all the things that they were somehow developing. And if you go on the History Channel or read other books, all these fabulous weapons. Maybe fabulous isn't the correct word, but whether it was the invention of the jet and planes that radar couldn't detect, or the bell, which also goes back to Eastern religions, that was either a weapon or could permit you to go between different dimensions, and all these other things that were going on. You see all of this coming together as a prototype for the end time,
Mm-hmm.
including the genocide against not only the Jewish people, but anybody that they felt were subhuman, and or at least sub what they believe that they are, sub the Aryan race. And that will also be part of the end times. So Hitler believed in Lord Maitreya. And what Lord Maitreya is either the Antichrist or one of the Antichrists of the end time, coming out of Eastern religions of Buddha and such. And so this Lord Maitreya is the ultimate of a number of people that have come before in their belief system. And so in their belief system is the world has been sent many enlighteners on the way, whether it be Confucius or whether it be Buddha, whether it be Muhammad, whether it be Moses, whether it be Jesus, in their opinion, and so many more. But this one that is coming will be more enlightened, and he will actually bring in the new age. So that's what Hitler was referring to.
Okay. Now, I've heard and read that the true Antichrist will be a man that is not a womanizer, that he is strictly a man about business. Does that fit what you've also learned?
It certainly doesn't pick a Nephilim trait, or some of the kings of the past that would be emulating the Nephilim kings of the past, let's say like the Merovingians and others, because the Nephilim were polygamous.
Mm-hmm.
And they had harems and many wives. And so, but if we look at Napoleon, he had a very unique marriage with Josephine, and was not a womanizer. And Hitler had a very unique relationship with, I'm
Eva Braun?
trying to think, Eva Braun, and no children. So if one were to look at those possible antichrist figures that have come along, and there have been more, but these are the most notable ones that sort of got closest to bringing about the spirit of the antichrist at that time. One could make a case that that would be similar to what the antichrist would be like. Yes.
Well, let's go ahead and take it back then to Napoleon. I'm curious, when Napoleon overtook the Vatican and the papal seat, it shut down Catholicism for 2 years. And that's the only time in history that I'm aware of that that happened. How did that make an impact on the Catholic Church? And weren't they on the same virtual side? I mean, the dark side.
No, I think it's not quite as clear cut as what people might think on that. So let's just sort of recreate the French Revolution here. So Napoleon comes along around 1794 or 1795, and he's a general who's in the army. But when the revolution took part, this was a Illuminati Freemasonry sponsored revolution to take down the papal sponsored king of that time. And so they wanted to create a new age, a new polytheist centered religious kingdom, and hopefully a descendant of their bloodlines. And initially they're going to put, I think it was Duke Orleans on the throne, and he was a well-known Freemason and Illuminati of that time. Now, that revolution got absolutely out of control. And you also need to understand that the three triumvirs who were the leaders of the French Revolution, and they were also Freemasons. But things got under control. And one of the first things that they did was they started to de-Christianize France as part of what they were going to build. And so they converted all the Catholic or Protestant churches over to the worship of Isis and Osiris. So the Egyptian religion was being imposed on France at that time, and that should come as no surprise because in Freemasonry, they use as their archetypical religion of all of the polytheist religions the ancient Egyptian religion.
Mm-hmm.
And they did things like change the calendar, and they put statues of Isis up in the churches. And so when Napoleon comes along, he does a trait of what the Antichrist will do. He says, "Thank you for giving me my empire," to this Babylon-type religion. But then he usurps power from Babylon. And so in that process, he wants to keep that belief system because he still is a polytheist, but he wants to find a way also, in my opinion, to get sort of the universal religion. So he wants to take Catholicism and get it totally under control. And so I don't know whether or not your audience would be familiar with the doctrine that he imposed upon the Catholic Church, which the Catholic Church did fight significantly once they found out what they had signed on to and the partnership that they had gotten into it. And that was the Concordat, or the Organic Articles. And what he was attempting to do was position the government over the church so that it authorizes everything the church could do, how many ministers, what they wore, what their doctrine was, that all Christian religions of that time, whether it was Protestantism or Catholicism, would have the same sort of catechism, and all religions would be worshiping from a new doctrine, which, of course, as you can imagine, the Roman Church, once they found that out, was not all that happy with. And including repositioning of what the Messiah doctrine was, because again, Napoleon saw himself as a Messiah as well, just as Hitler did, and just as, of course, the Antichrist will do. Even though the Pope was forced to crown Napoleon as the Holy Roman Emperor, and I think that was in 1804, shortly thereafter, it becomes irreconcilable. And so Napoleon does now what the Antichrist will do to the Church of Rome. He goes in and he deposes the Pope, just as the Antichrist will depose the false prophet who takes over the Roman Church, and actually exiles the Pope until after Napoleon is overthrown. Pius, I believe, Pius the third or fourth, I'm not sure which, but definitely Pius was in prison. And so, okay, so now Napoleon goes. So now what does all of this mean? So there's really a lot of scar tissue here. So people can say, okay, the church was corrupt before that and they had moles in it. That is absolutely correct. But coming out of this is the Roman Church found how vulnerable they were in this partnership. And so they made some moves to reinstitute the Jesuits, do the things that they wanted, because that was one of the organizations that was decommissioned during the Revolution. And also, they started to excommunicate the Freemasons because they saw the Freemasons were coming out clearly as their enemy. And so I take from that, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me, is even though we can disagree a lot with what the Catholic Church has done over the years, typically, except when some popes who have clearly not been Christian and have been Gnostic, but for the most part, they've been a Christian religion, whether or not we agree with the things they do or not. But in the end time, they're going to change, and they're going to be taken over completely, and all of their doctrines and things are going to be changed into a new Christianity that mixes in polytheism, very similar to what Napoleon was doing. So you can expect this as part of the end time.
Do you think that the Pope will be actively involved in that, or that it will come from an outside source, or both?
I think that it's both, but definitely it takes leadership for the last pope before the false prophet to make sure that these doctrines are being changed and that they are preparing the Catholic Church to be taken over, because it doesn't stop there, because they have to take over all of the religions of the world. And so they will welcome in all of the religions of the world under this new universal umbrella religion, but essentially they'll all be the same religion because they'll have changed Roman Catholicism and many parts of Protestantism to a polytheist religion. Now, perhaps not everybody will realize that they've changed to become part of a polytheist religion. Perhaps it'll be similar to how all of those organizations are set up, where only the true beliefs are worshipped at the core.
Hmm.
And everything else is for public consumption. And I'll cover off some of this in the book because it's an intricate web that they're bringing. But I believe that this Rome will be taken over by mysticism, and it will expand through their doctrine, through signs, through scare tactics, to unite under one religion, to repent under one religion, or be removed from the face of the earth, or driven from the face of the earth, or destroyed from the face of the earth. And that's why all of these apocalyptic propaganda that we're getting is so much in line with what needs to take place.
Now, I've noticed that this Pope has had several meetings with what I call the mainstream preachers, like Rick Warren and several others, and it looks to be like it is the ultimate setup to bring about that one world religion.
It is, and part of what has to be done to bring this about is they have to bring in leaders from other religions, other sects of Christianity. They have to make outreaches to Islam. They'll have to make outreaches to Eastern religions, and all of this is going on. Whether this is the last pope or not, I think there's a possibility that this is the Pope of Malachi, and I'm watching very closely as to what they do. These are the types of things that need to happen, just as the papacy has to become more political.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to see that now, being involved in Cuba, being involved with the UN on global warming, trip to the United States, posing on the Middle East to a certain degree. And we're going to need to see more and more and more of that, because the religion comes first, and the religion will make the way for the 10 empires to come together in the end time. So you have to have the universal religion first, and then world government, and then the Antichrist comes along at the midpoint of the last 3.5 years to just usurp and take over this end time world government. And again, that usurping, illegal taking of the end time world government is exactly what happened in the two terrific examples of the spirit of the Antichrist that we've talked about, Napoleon and Hitler. Is both of those Antichrist figures or Antichrist wannabes usurped the government illegally.
It's true. Now, I've heard, but I haven't been able to vet this, but I've heard that the Pope actually has the architecture, the schematics, everything that he needs to start rebuilding the temple.
The Vatican has knowledge and records beyond belief, whether it's on the occult or anything that goes on in the world. Their library would probably rival only that of the Freemasons, and the Freemasons also have what they believe will be the schematics and the drawings, and they believe they either got that from the Templar excavations in Jerusalem in 1099 that they brought with them back to Europe, along with a whole bunch of other things, and or they've had them all along, because again, in their belief systems is that their belief system includes the builder guilds, and their religion produced all of the great builders of history, including the Solomon Temple that came out of Tyre with Hiram Abiff as the king, and the builders that he sent over there. And if you go back into prehistory, this knowledge of building goes right back to the building of the pyramids. But at that point in time, and say for 1,000 or 2,000 years before, the Cretan builders, which is where this knowledge came to Tyre from, and likely with the Philistines, they built all of the major temples around the ancient world of that time. So when we talk about anything about architecture and building guilds, this is again the same sort of belief system, and the Masonry, which is the fifth science that builds things, that Freemasonry is part of. And in Freemasonry, they have rituals that they perform on a regular basis, particularly as people are rising through the various levels, that keep this history alive. So it doesn't matter whether or not they have a Hiram Abiff ritual, they have a KT ritual, which is the Knights Templars. All of this is encoded in their belief system. And if you want to look at an example, although they said it was a scale, and I've not been able to verify it, but they believe, and their writings say that they actually built a replica of Solomon's temple back in the Middle Ages. And so people will probably not be surprised if they've done any research on the Knights Templar and the Sinclairs and Robert the Bruce. It's also encoded into the literature, as all this stuff is in the Da Vinci Code, that Roslyn Chapel was built by the Sinclairs as a smaller model of the Solomon Temple. And they brought this knowledge back with them from Jerusalem. And if you want to know, again, another example of this sort of building cult, and they had control of the builder guilds, but there was two types of temples being built, and I'll cover this off in my book. There was the Romanesque style, which is sort of the square and squat style that had no windows and there was no light. And that was built by the Manichaeans, who had molded themselves into the Catholic Church, who brought this building technology because the church needed to build temples. Now roll forward into England and St. Augustine, who I know history says he converted to Christianity, but everything he did was completely polytheist. And building of Canterbury and the monks of Cluny that he was ahead of, they were building temples in England, and also their brethren over in France were building these temples. Now the Templars come back, and there's a revolution of the building, and that's the Gothic architecture. They have these flying buttresses and these huge, gigantic temples that have these wonderful glass windows. This knowledge, they say, they believe they brought back with them from what they discovered at the Temple of Jerusalem.
Wow. Oh, what a picture that paints.
Isn't it? It's just, and I'll cover so much of this off in the book, but you can just see these connections and from all different aspects that are all moving in the same direction throughout history.
Now, this is a little off the topic, but just something for me that I'm curious about. What do you think about the Catholic Church building this telescope called Lucifer?
Well, I'm not that familiar with that, but that is disturbing.
That's what I thought. Each letter in the name of Lucifer stands for something about this infrared attachment on this telescope, and it's really a far stretch on how they put it together, but that to me just went hand in hand, like you said, connecting the dots with where this Pope stands at along with everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's not clear to me what they're doing with that technology and what they're searching for. But again, I believe we will learn about that. I don't know whether it's got to do with trying to prove alien life or aliens, or they're searching for Lucifer, or they want to study planet Venus, or what they're up to with that. But the name is so inappropriate. It just is. It's hard to believe that would happen, but unfortunately
And it's another one of those in-your-face things. And
Yeah,
I've heard that they've got it
exactly.
so locked down that it might as well be Fort Knox.
Yeah, so what they're really doing, we don't know. But it's not just studying the
No.
stars.
I'm going to go back a little bit farther in time. I've seen a lot of questions lately about and discussion on how the giants still existed after the flood. And I'm curious if you can enlighten us on how you believe this happened.
Right, and we know in Genesis 6 that it says that the Nephilim were both before and after the flood, but it doesn't tell us how.
Right.
And then when we look into accounts after the flood, we have all of these different nations that are popping up in different peoples, some giants, some not, that are not descending out of the table of nations in First Chronicles and in Genesis. And for those who aren't familiar with the table of nations, that's just the descendants of Noah and his three sons and their sons. And so we have a complete listing of all of the nations that came out of those people. But yet now we have inserted whether or not it's the Amalekites. And people might say the Amalekites, they come from Amalek. Well, that's fine, except that the Amalekites are predated in Genesis before Amalek was born. And for those who don't know who Amalek was, he was the grandson, as I recall, of Esau. And what Amalek did was he married into the sons of Seir, or the daughters of Seir, the people who, again, are inserted into the Table of Nations, and we have no idea where they came from. But they're known as the sons of Seir and or the Horites, and they created the great Amalekite nation, which was believed to be, and I'll document in the book, were a nation of giants. So now we have humans marrying into the giants. And I'll even take Amalek back, not through the Bible because it's not there, to before the flood. And so we have Rapha, who is the father of the Raphaites, and he is not in the Table of Nations. And so we have Arba, who is the father of Anak. He is not in the Table of Nations. And we know in the Old Testament that Anak are Raphaites, and Anak also descend from Nephilim. And so we have this sort of chain, Nephilim, Rephaim, Anakite. So either there was a recreation of Nephilim, which I'll give a plausibility around the Sodom and Gomorrah story, or they somehow survived the flood. And if we look at, let's say, how I connect giants to Sodom and Gomorrah, let's go back to what I call the War of 4 Kings against 5. And that's in the time of Abraham. And in this war, they're all listed in Genesis 14, as I recall. All these different nations that alliance out of Mesopotamia fought against these different kings in around the Sodom and Gomorrah area that also extended down, all the way down to Seir. This was a war against all of giant nations. And so if we have the giants amongst the Amorites and the other peoples, and we have the Emites, and we have the Avites, and all of these different giant nations at the time of Abraham, at the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, we can't deny that there's a connection between Sodom and Gomorrah and Nephilim. And in the Gnostic religion, they believe Sodom and Gomorrah was not a city of evil, it was a city of light, and they believe it was where the seed of the antediluvians, and in this case, the giants, was transplanted after the flood. So that's like an allegory for a second and passion violation. So possibly at Sodom and Gomorrah, there was another recreation of giants. But we still have this sort of connection of how do some of these giants connect back to before the flood, and that gets to be that conundrum. I think people are familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
And the Epic of Gilgamesh is very similar to the flood story at the macro level as Genesis is. In Gilgamesh, who tells the story to Enkidu, these are both declared Nephilim. They are demigods. They are created from Mother Earth, which is an allegory for human women in the polytheist belief system, and a god. And so we have two Nephilim telling the story of their survival of the flood. And Gilgamesh is telling this story to Enkidu about a particular king who rode out in the ark. And this king was either Ziusudra, depending on which language you're talking about, or Upnapishtim. And this was another demigod, Nephilim, an archetypical Anunnaki. And all three of these were Anunnaki, in case other people are wondering, okay, how do we know? Other than what the religions say, they're self-declared Anunnaki. And Upnapishtim was the archetypical military warrior Anunnaki at the time of the flood, and the king that survived the flood with many of his relatives. How many, we don't know. But when we go back to the ancient Apocrypha Gospels of Enoch, and in the Book of Giants, and in Enoch 1 and 2, where most of your readers in this genre, probably very familiar with, there's a story of a fellow that is being warned about the flood, and his name is Gilgamesh. And I find that just way too much of a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't think coincidences happen. I really don't.
No, neither do I. And in the Gilgamesh epic, he is believed to have survived the flood as well. So he must have been a kin of Upnapishtim. What I'm suggesting is there's possibly two parallel testimonies here that are supporting each other.
Mm-hmm.
All the mythologies and all the religions of the world, there are giants, and there's the flood story, and there's a testimony of giants surviving the flood. And the most common one, and there's that people will be aware of, would be the Greek ones. And there's two stories of how they would survive the flood there. One would be with Deucalion and Norea. And Norea has several different names as his wife and the children, and they also land on a mountain as well. But what's interesting about Deucalion, he is also a Nephilim. He is a son of Prometheus. And in Greek mythology, Prometheus is both a titan, giant, and a god. So I don't really care whether or not Deucalion is a direct son of the god or fallen angel, or a son of another Nephilim. He was Nephilim. And so it's just another story of a Nephilim survival. And also in Greek mythology, in the Titan rebellion against the gods, those rebellious Titans were locked away in Tartarus. That is believed to be either in an abyss-type location or a prison or another dimension. But in the other belief systems, these giants survived to repopulate after the flood. And so my point is that we can't conclusively say that giants survived the flood from a scriptural perspective, except that we have all of these unaccounted for nations and people. And then we also have and I think I covered off I'm not going to get that word, enigmatic Og and his brother Sihon. In that, when we look in Deuteronomy 3 and in Deuteronomy 3 and Joshua 12, as I recall, Og is referred to after losing the battle with Joshua as the last of the Rephaites. And therefore, Sihon, who was his brother, would have been the last of the Rephaites as well. And so what does that mean? That is such and it says that in both accounts. So it's not just one. So we have two accounts saying he's the last of the Rephaites. Well, we know Rephaites survived much after Og did, or Sihon. In fact, the Israelites went in and fought all of these Rephaites to take the land of the conquest. And I already covered off Anak were also Rephaim. And also I'll talk about Avites as being Rephaim, and I'll connect Goliath to being a Rephite. So we know Rephaites lived after the battle where Sihon was killed and where Og's other sons were killed. And how could he be called the last of the Rephites? I don't believe the Bible is in contradiction.
No, there has to be an explanation.
There has to be an explanation. And Og isn't even called the father of the Rephites. That's Rapha. So again, we have another enigmatic comment in the Bible that we can't reconcile with giants not surviving the flood.
That's really deep.
It's really, really deep. And there's other peoples, the Kenites and the Kenizzites. They actually believe that they descend from Tubal-Cain.
Really?
How is that possible? And again, they are not part of the Table of Nations. And they also lived with the Amalekites, as did the Girzites and the Gerizzites, or Geshurites, I'm sorry. They both lived with the Amalekites, and in both locations, because the Amalekites were not only in Seir, but they were also in the east as well. So these nations that were living with the Amalekites, who I believe survived the flood as well, and I'll talk about that in detail in the book and document that. Why, it's just too much of a coincidence that these other nations not listed in the Table of Nations were living with the giants.
Now, I know that when I first learned about the giants and my curiosity really kicked in, and I put together the fact of all the violence in the Old Testament, in the books of Moses, why there was so much violence. And I linked the fact that the giants, that their tribes all ended with ITES. And those were the ones that God wanted to have wiped out, and that he sent Joshua out with their troops to wipe all of these ites out, even before anything else.
Right. And I certainly did not make a connection with the suffix to those peoples, and so I don't know whether that goes right across the board, but I like that insight, and certainly it is relevant. And I'll cover off in my book that these nations, these Nephilim nations, they laid in ambush waiting for the nation of hope to come. They wanted to stop the people that were going to bring the Messiah on, and so they could have chose to live anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They chose there in great numbers. And so the violence that took in expropriating the promised land was a war, a rendezvous with sort of destiny that could not be avoided. It was the territory God had kept for himself. It's holy, and it was going to go to his people. The giants settled there, waiting for Israel to come. And so this was a taking of the land from people who squatted on that territory and who clearly know the rebellion and who they were standing against and why they were there and why they fought so voraciously against this nation of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you go through the section 3 of my book, you're going to learn that the whole conquest needs to be looked at in a completely different view, and I'll walk everybody through that. And in that section, I'll talk about all these other different peoples and sort of bring that all into one narrative for people.
That's great. Now, I had a theory, and I just want to run this by you. Trying to understand the fact of the giants existing after the flood. The flood got rid of the beings that had been born of the giants. But since the Nephilim were spirit beings,
Mm-hmm.
that all the people that had been born to the giants, they would have been wiped out in the flood. But the spirit
Right.
part could make a reappearance at any time after the flood and start the procreation again.
Okay. I think that's possible. It's certainly not my take on it, okay?
Mm-hmm. I just tried to find
And
an,
here
an answer, but yours makes more
an answer,
sense.
yes, yeah. Now here's why I think it's not that way. The original Nephilim they were born with an immortal spirit, and so we also know in Genesis 6, and therefore this is not a coincidence, is that God limited life to 120 years after that violation. Because what had happened was we had the spirit of heaven now living in flesh, and it was
Mm-hmm.
immortal. And it's amazing that fallen angels could actually pass that on, but we take that as a definite possibility. And so God moved to make sure that that violation wasn't going to be passed on, even though descending generations might live longer for a while. Over time, that whole trait of long lives would disappear.
Right.
When we look at that, then we say, okay, well, eventually then the immortal giants, and this is also a parallel testimony around the world, these giants eventually died out because their bodies died, but their spirit remained. And these are the demons, and their spirits that, if there are some that were committed to the abyss, there are others that weren't, because we know Jesus talked about these demons in the New Testament, and the ones known as Legion, for example, did not want to be sent to the abyss where some of their friends were, right?
Right.
So there are these demons that are out there today, and those are the bodiless original giants. And perhaps maybe they're even the descendants of giants as well, because perhaps they didn't go to sleep, perhaps their spirits are to roam as well. And I'll cover off that linkage in the book. And if you want to go to a couple of parallel testimonies of that, is people may not be connecting the dots on what hero worship is. And that was a Greek religious thing that took on in ancient history, where when their king and their leader died, they believed the spirit was there, and the spirit was very upset, and they continued to worship this hero afterward. And that's called hero worship. And then there's another account also in Taoism on these ghost demons on these leaders that would come back and haunt them as well.
I think if people knew exactly what the word hero means, they would not use it so easily today to describe people that they look up to.
Yes, hero had a significantly, and this will be on the first couple of pages of the book that I open up, a completely different meaning in the ancient world than it does
Mm-hmm.
today. And it definitely referred to demigods in the ancient world. And if you look at the Nephilim description in Genesis 6, the words now become as what a Gibberim is, because the Nephilim were Gibberim in their aspects, and Gibberim is the people of renown and heroes of old.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah, so that's why I don't believe that it's the demons that can actually procreate, although they may have technology or something or inspire something to do that. So I don't believe that it was the bodiless, the spirits of the bodiless giants that did the recreation after the flood somehow.
Your explanation makes so much more sense. Next, I'd like to ask you, and we didn't get a chance to get into it on the other broadcast, but you were talking about the lines of fairies, that the word fairy came from the word pharaoh and other originations. How did the fairies that were the giants end up being these little tiny fairies that people have in their mind today and that we see in the artwork and movies?
And sort of the standard sort of answer to that is it was a Vatican sort of approach to belittle, so to speak, the legacy of the giants and their genealogy and the whole sort of mystical aspect that surrounds them. That's a possibility. That to me is not the answer. That, and it may be part of the answer, but it's not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So in fairy mythos and mythology, there are 4 groups of fairies. If people aren't familiar with the fairy mythology then and the mythos, then this is going to be a little bit eye-opening, and you're going to find some very quick connections here to what we just talked about. So such an appropriate question. So there are 4 groups. The first group is the opalescent spirit fairies with wings that in fairy mythology they came from the other planets. We would know them as fallen angels. And they bore what they call earthborn fairies, or the Nephilim. And these were shining beings as well. So now we have the exact same story in fairy mythology as what we have in Genesis, another parallel sort of story. But what gets interesting now, specifically to your question, is the next 2 groups. So the third group is the daemons, and that would be spelled D-A-E as opposed to the way that we spell it D-E-M, so D-A-E-M-O-N. But that's the spirit bearing. So I take that as that's the body, that's the spirits of the original Nephilim that died out. And then there's a 4th group called the elementals. And so the elementals breaks down into 3 other different categories. And these are little people. And those 3 little peoples within the elemental group are known as the gnomes as one group, and also within the gnomes are the goblins and the sprites. Category 2 is the leprechauns. And category 3, also known as the little people. So other elementals, you've got gnomes and goblins, then you've got leprechauns, and you've got little people. And so all of these different people have different roles in prehistory and likely even into our time. Now, what's really interesting is that in these little people, you get all of these good-looking fairies, the ones with wings,
Yes.
and so that's likely going to come from the leprechauns. But if you want to get into the alien phenomena, look to the gnomes and the goblins and the sprites. These goblins, here's what they look like. They're also called little grays, or the gray neighbor. And they had gray skin, they had large oval heads, they had almond-shaped dark eyes that shone, spindly limbs, and they had technology and flying machines. And these gray neighbors in Scottish mythology and Irish mythology and English mythology on these fairies, they would come out of these fairy knolls or shays, shays spelled S-I-D-H-E-S. Those were portals. So now we see another linkage back into alien mythology where spaceships come through these portals, and they had flying machines and great technology, and they would kidnap people, and they would do experiments on them, and they were trying to replenish their genetic line, and then they would return people after a while. So I will put that in an example in my book, and if you did not realize that that was a fairy account of a gray neighbor, you would think it was an alien abduction.
Mm-hmm.
It is identical, and the description is identical. So it's not that somehow fairies went from giants to little people. They're just four different groups, one of them being giants.
Now I understand
And
that.
yeah, and so what is being suggested in this mythology and in all the literature and the entertainment and everything else that we see, whether it's Tolkien or fairy tales, of all of these different elves, and elves are, when the elves come in, that's just the Nordic variation of the same story, as opposed to, let's say, the English or the French version. Elves are a German Viking word, and I think I talked about the elven bloodline
Yes.
in the last book. So again, you see all of this sort of connected, whether or not it's aliens or it's religion or it's kingships. It's all related, and that is just not a
I
coincidence.
know that in what I've read and some of the research, that everyone has this, like you said, this friendly, happy, magical being. But when you really
Mm-hmm.
get into the mythology and to the folklore, not just the ones that look like the Greys, but all of them were very, very wicked and very mean, and
Yes.
they came at people almost with a vengeance.
Yes. Yes, they were. And, one of the biggest manipulations and seduced sort of allegories is when we look at Santa Claus and the elves.
Yes.
And so we get a nice sort of rewritten version that's today, but its roots is what these elves did to the children on the naughty list. And so this is not a nice sort of narrative. It's been sanitized to sort of de-Christianize Christmas and to replace St. Nicholas with Santa Claus a with a whole mythology out of northern or Viking or Norse mythology. And the reason why these beings are kept alive is it's their belief system that there were these many different types of beings before the flood,
Mm-hmm.
and they also survived through these portals and other worlds and dimensions, whatever you want to call it. We can't support that scripturally, of course, but what we also can't discount is why it is so ever present. It's almost omnipresent, with inundating us with all of this belief system. Again, I believe it's in preparation for the end time.
It would seem to be that way. The ultimate deception, the part of the Bible that said when good will be evil and evil will be good, that everything has
Yes,
just been turned on its head.
yes, inside out, upside down,
Mm-hmm. That's really
and
fascinating.
it is, and people have been inundated with the Tolkien movies of the last decade or so, and Hobbit and the elves and the little people that are in there. That's their way of keeping sort of alive this mythos that they believe they actually can prove that there were these other people before the flood.
Mm-hmm.
Even down to what the orcs that are in there. That's also part of their belief system as to a certain amount of a certain type of people that were before the flood.
Yeah, it's just like when we were talking after the broadcast last week about the fact that the Knights of the Round Table, that the Round Table was actually connected with the symbolism from the movie Lord of the Rings.
Yes, it
It's
is. It
all
is
linked.
the ring of kingship. Now let me link this one back for you just a little bit more. We were talking about the little people. So when we talk about the Merlins of King Arthur, Merlin wasn't a name; it was a title. And Merlins were these religious leaders and these wise ones. And in Latin, that goes back to either noble or, in a Greek version, to noble with a G, or with a GNU. Okay, so what do those words mean? To know, and they're also the root words to gnosis and to noble, as in a lord.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
well, the fairy people of the English, Scottish, and Irish ancestry were known as the noble elven bloodline, the fairy noble elven bloodline. And what's interesting now when we talk about these gnomes and these goblins that could be the gray aliens, these were the beings that were in charge of holding on and storing the antediluvian knowledge and the secrets
Mm-hmm.
and all of the genealogies. And so when you look at chasing the treasure at the end of the rainbow, now you understand what their allegory is talking about, and who leads people or is forced to allow people to get to the end of the rainbow. That's one of those little peoples called the leprechaun. That's not a coincidence. And the treasure isn't money, the treasure is the knowledge and the secrets of the knowledge and what took place before the flood. And it's at the end of the rainbow because the rainbow is what God left as a reminder of the flood.
Yes, it's his promise.
Yes, that we will not have another apocalypse by water. And knowledge is their belief system. And it goes back to the knowledge of the seven sacred sciences, what they developed it to, the other knowledge that came from the fallen angels, because they believe that one of the keys to evolving into godhood is development of knowledge, but being able to discipline that knowledge with philosophy and control it. So reason over knowledge, reason over faith.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you find all of these different concepts coming together.
It's just like you said, connect the dots.
Connect the dots. It's absolutely everywhere. Nothing can be taken for granted. And so when we look at something that is so in our face, that looks so positive and good, and then we look at some of the the symbolism of these things, it's absolutely frightening. So let's take doctors and medical associations. What is their motif?
Oh, they have the symbol with the serpent wrapped around it.
Yeah, they have either a single serpent motif or a double snake motif. And the double snake motif actually looks almost like DNA.
Isn't it wrapped around a
But
sword or something that looks like?
it's a stick, or in their belief system, it's the staff of Hermes.
Oh.
And on some of them you have the wings on the bottom, which is the wings on Hermes' feet. And the serpent is a representation for knowledge and wisdom, and also for the god Enki and Satan and Lucifer and so many other
Mm-hmm.
religions. And as you recall, we talked about all of science in the modern era goes back to the Royal Society, or the Invisible College, in the last show, that was created by Freemasonry and the Rosicrucians to honor the great architect of the universe, which is Lucifer. It's all connected.
It it's overwhelming. It really
It's
is.
the size and the scope of the conspiracy is so powerful, it's not going to be stopped. And of course, we know in the Bible it won't be stopped until Jesus returns.
That's right. And what I find
They,
fascinating is the fact that they can keep this all together. That it goes so far back and the plan is held together for this long.
yes, and it's resurged and been pushed back and resurged, but the organizational structure
Mm-hmm.
remains, and now it is gaining significant mass. I mean, its tentacles are absolutely everywhere, and one of the reasons why I believe we are on the edge of the end time.
I believe you're right. I would like to go in, it's just a little bit different direction, but I'm curious. In the painting of The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, it's very visible that the Holy Grail is missing. What do you think the
Yes,
significance of that is? And was Leonardo da Vinci a member of a secret society? Was this part of a plan?
yes. Yes, 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 and yes. So let me backstep and set this up, and hopefully I can lay it out reasonably logically. So we talked about the
Mm-hmm.
Templars, And one of the, and we talked about the order of the Red Cross in the last show that goes all the way back to Solomon. And so there's a specific group within this whole Essene sort of descendancy called Rex Du, and they formed this organization called the Priory of Sion, or the Temple of Solomon, or the Temple of Zion. And so this is all connected with the builder guilds that we talked about before as well. But let's stay a little bit more of a rifle shot on this one because it is a little bit complicated. So the Priory of Sion are the people that put forth the original Knights Templar and create that organization. Although history records 9, their record says there's 11 and then name them. And that includes the St. Clairs, or the St. Clairs, and some very other famous European nobility. So these weren't regular knights. So they created the Knights Templar to excavate in Jerusalem, bring back all of this knowledge, and then they brought back this new sort of society, a secret society, and a religion with a religion, and became the most powerful organization on the planet of that time, not only militarily, but also through wealth, because they became the banks of Europe and funding all of the wars. And they set all of the great banking sort of structure and facilities up for modern banking. And of course, they needed to be replaced with the Rothschilds after the demise of the Templars. But there was this significant split at the cutting of the elm at Geezers, which is the ark where they expect the Antichrist to make his great entrance into in Geezers. Just in case anybody wants to keep an eye out for that to see whether or not their belief system is accurate on how they're going to bring this about. So the Priory of Sion split away because I thought the Templars had lost their way. What their ultimate goal was to get a king on first France that descended back through their bloodlines, and then ultimately the world. So ultimately setting up the Antichrist. And so they stood on the sidelines while the Templars were being disassembled and had to reorganize in Scotland under the St. Clairs and King Bruce, as we talked about in the last show as well. Okay, so this Priory of Sion has a list of their Grand Masters, and on that list is Leonardo da Vinci. And I'll cover this off in the book, and I'll show all these sort of mystical connections in that section of the book. And so as a Grand Master of this society, they do just what Freemasonry does in everything that they do, is they encode and use allegories and symbols. And so Da Vinci was a painter. And of course, he paints the Last Supper. Mm-hmm. And in that painting, there is no goblet on the table.
Right.
Right? But there is a grail there. And it's a grail from their belief system, and it's the bloodline of not only the Nephilim, but also of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And so you have a symbol that comes out of ancient Sumeria and Mesopotamia, and it's all part of the polytheist belief system, where the symbol of the feminine or the matriarch of the bloodline is symbolized by a V. And if you look on that painting, you've got what we believe is John on the right and Jesus, and they're leaning away from each other, and they create the V. And so that's the Grail bloodline.
Oh.
Right? And so if you were to invert that as into like a tip up, that would be like a pyramid. That's the male side. But this is the female matriarch bloodline that they're trying to represent. And then if you look at the figure that's on the immediate right of Jesus, it is very much an effeminate picture.
Yes.
Long hair, woman. That's in their belief system. All he's done is encoded from the Gnostic belief system is that's Mary Magdalene, and they're saying and showing it in front of everybody that Jesus and Mary married and had children and will be part of the bloodline of the Antichrist. And it represents an in-your-face that's out there every day on how they're going to try and bring down Christianity by taking away the resurrection and the virgin birth.
Yes, and that's being implemented right now. They're trying to.
They're trying to. And they believe they have evidence of this, and that's how they're going to shatter Christianity as we know it. Only Christians absolutely solid in their belief in the face of these delusions are going to stand and say no. But most will not. So that is how part of how Christianity is reinvented under this new mystical universal religion.
I've read also that Leonardo da Vinci, that he had said, or someone had tried to link him as a distant relative of Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Yes, he believes he was in a scene as all of these people in these organizations believe they are.
Right.
Part of the ceremonies as being a Templar, which is the organization that these people created, in secrecy, in the secret worship, they would spit on the cross.
That is so painful to even think of.
Yes, and they firmly believe that Jesus is not the Redeemer, he's not the Word of God, and he had no divinity status whatsoever, and he actually survived the cross. And Joseph of Arimathea took him down because he got permission from Pilate, and he took him down before he died. And even in the Bible, Pilate's quite surprised at how fast Jesus died, and they use this as part of their story. And they nurse him back to health. They have Mary and Jesus escape in different directions, and then they unite and have children after that. And Joseph Arimathea doesn't take the Grail to England; he takes Grail child or the Grail bloodline as part of protecting that descendant, and that descendant marries into the fairy kingships, the descendants of the Tuatha Danann in England, and that becomes this super bloodline that begins 2,000 years ago, and it's the modern wedge of the conspiracy.
That's such blasphemy.
It is. But they are creating pedigree for the Antichrist, which is the ultimate blasphemy. So it fits. It doesn't mean it's true, that aspect of it, but that's what they're going to try and do, in my opinion.
And the great deception, it all goes together.
Yeah, so that's why you have, and I'll talk about this in the book as well, as the war between literalism of the Bible and the allegorical concept, is they want to redefine the Bible as not what it says, here's what it means. So everything has to be interpreted. And the reason why they want to do that is they want to use the New Testament with Jesus' account to bring him in the fold as a prophet, but not as the Son of God. And so they're going to say everything in the New Testament is an allegory. He didn't actually die and rise. That's just an allegory. And you can even see it today where people say, well, Jonah was the story of Jonah was an allegory. And they're going to connect the two in the end time as one of their arguments. Because if you accept Jonah and being in the whale of the belly for 3 days and 3 nights as an allegory, then you have to accept that Jesus using his sign to that generation as the sign of Jonah is also an allegory. So anytime you hear somebody talking about in a religious context or a religious leader that says Jonah is an allegory, understand where they're going with it.
And run as fast as you can.
And run as fast as you can.
Because I was just reading that, in fact, in the last 2 weeks about where Jesus cites that he would be like Jonah. That would be his sign.
Yes.
And they're taking advantage of the words that Jesus said himself and using them against him.
Yes, they will. And the other thing is just as we're talking about this subject, is that if they'll also say, well, how could Jesus be 3 days and 3 nights in the grave if he was crucified on Friday? And so there's a couple explanations, but the best one, and you can get into when the day starts and when it doesn't.
Right.
But if you understand the Old Testament, you understand the Feast of the Passover. After Passover starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right? And it's the next day. And so if you understand the Feast of Unleavened Bread was about to begin, you will understand there was always a special Sabbath, and would be on a different day of the week, just like Christmas falls on a different day of the week today. So Feast of Unleavened Bread starts with a special Sabbath. That means Passover. In this case, you have Passover on the Thursday and the crucifixion. You have the special Sabbath on the Friday. You have the true Sabbath on the Saturday, the resurrection on the Sunday, and then everything is in perfect harmony.
As a child, I drove my parents crazy because, and I was really little. I would always say that if Jesus was crucified on Friday and he rose on Sunday, that's not 3 days. And also with what the seventh day of the week is and what the first day of the week is for the
Right.
Sabbath. And everyone used
Yes.
to look at me. I think I was only probably about 7 or 8, and they would just scratch their heads. And I never did get a straight answer until I was old enough to be able to do the research myself.
Yeah, and everything has to be without contradiction. It has to be perfect, otherwise it doesn't work. It's not the Word of God if it's in contradiction.
Hmm.
And he can't be 3 days and 3 nights if he is crucified on the Friday. But all we have to do is read the Bible. All the answers are there. And if you were to lay out all of the accounts in the four Gospels, you will see these Jewish holidays and the description and the rituals and everything that has to be done when is all part of this whole sort of crucifixion process. And everything lays out perfectly.
Hmm.
The Gospels add different information or additional information. They are not in conflict. But when you lay them all out in line with the Passover instructions and the Feast of Unleavened Bread instructions, everything meshes
It
perfectly.
does, and you have to get away from concentrating so much on the Gregorian calendar. That is where we get
Yes,
into trouble at when we do look at the days for the feast, how long, when Jesus was crucified, our Sabbaths. We need to look away from the Gregorian and go back to the calendar from then.
yes, yes. I mean, they were definitely on a lunar calendar back then.
Hmm.
And I mean, everything meshes up differently. So,
Yeah, very fascinating. The one more question that I have for you, I know that we're getting towards the end, but in your opinion, and I know that it's just conjecture, what do you believe that the mark of the beast is?
hmm.
It could possibly be.
Well, I think two things on that. I think definitely we're going to see something with the chip and the numbers come up. But I'm going to come back in a couple seconds and talk about what the Gnostics and other religions and the secret societies believe.
Okay.
But I do believe that we're going to see a chip because it's going to go into the forehead and into the right hand, and it's got to be something that's going to permit transactions and store information and have ID and everything like that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who look at the UPC code or the barcode.
Yes, I remember when they came out, what people thought.
Yeah, and there's three sets of numbers in those barcodes, and so you'll get a barcode that has two sets of bars, two sets of numbers right now, a left and a right, and there's one that just has one set of numbers. And so you've got three sets, two sets in the two set column, and the third one goes into the one that's just a single set of numbers. But all of them are split with parallel lines, and the parallel lines will go on the outside
Mm-hmm.
to frame it, and then one down the middle, and they're usually a little bit longer, and they are never accompanied by a number. And the number 6 in the second set is that parallel bar as the code. So the three unnumbered bars in all the barcodes is a 6, a 6, and a 6. Is that a coincidence? Perhaps. I think not. I think it's related
When I
somehow.
found that out, it blew me away. It really did. I thought all these years we've had this, and then it's just like my eyes opened.
Sure. And the people who want to who have the technology for the smart card, and it goes back to Mondex, and then Lucent Technologies had it for a while, and Lucent is no longer, but it's still out there, and Visa and MasterCard have the rights to the Mondex smart card technology. And they know the only way to have security so they can eliminate all the fraud is to implement it, guess where? In the right hand and or the forehead.
Hmm.
So I think this is going to have a play. But in terms of what the other side thinks, in terms of what the mark is they think it's the mark of Cain that will be the mark of the beast. And I don't think so, but that's what they believe. And what they believe is it was the mark of Cain is what is known in occultism as the Oribus. And the Oribus is perhaps something that people haven't heard of before, but it's essentially a circle that has a dragon inside the middle of it. And they believe that is the mark of Cain, and that will be one of the marks that people are going to need to take to show their loyalty to the Antichrist. So we may have two things going on there.
With all the knowledge, Gary, that you've researched and that you've learned, do you ever feel like just standing and yelling, people, it's here? Look at this. You've got to wake up. You've got to see this information. It's time.
Well, it's why I wrote the book, because it is so pervasive, so many tentacles, so complicated. You can't sit down and have a quick conversation with somebody and have them see the whole picture. This is so massive, so well planned, that it's why I wanted to be able to lay it out in a manner that people got it. But yeah, but people think it's just too far out there. It's too impossible to be the case.
That's right.
But yet they're in our face with it all the time. And that's the great thing. They get to hide in the open.
I get very frustrated with it because I see people caring about their daily lives and their heads are down, they're stuck in the cell phone, and people never look up and people never look around them. And they are too focused on themselves, and they're missing out on so much, and they're going to walk into this trap that the knowledge has been there all along, but they just never bothered to take the time to look.
Right. And many never will. And there will be so many people that are caught off guard and deceived in the end time. And it's unfortunate. But hopefully, we can awaken a few to at least sit up and take notice and to start to ask some good, hard, critical questions and pursue what is going on and continue to ask more difficult questions and then match that up with what the Bible says.
Right.
And I think they'll be stunned when they do that, to me, it's not, as a Christian, it's not that this will never happen. It's just that the odds of it happening so much sooner than what people think is absolutely astounding. And I know people have predicted the end times ever since it was probably prophesied, but everything is lining up so much unlike it ever has in the past between technology and the geopolitical scenario. It just seems like if we're not there, we can see it down the road at some point in time. So it's coming, and it's coming quick.
If we open up our Bible and look at Revelation, and I always like to cross-reference with Isaiah, and their time has sped up. I mean, we're in that quickening point, and every day we can pick our Bible up and see something new that has happened today that we can find it in the Bible talking about in the last days. And that's the sign right there.
It is. And the thing that we don't, I think it's a mistake for people to do is try and pin every event that they see on a fulfillment of a prophecy. As things are coming about, it's the trend line to fulfill that prophecy. And then when we get into those last 7 years and a few short before, then everything will be much more specific to a specific event. What you're looking for today is an assembling of the landscape, that everything is in place, or a probability that the outcome, like a universal religion, is on the landscape to come about to permit the end time to happen, because it can't unless everything is there. And let's face it, the universal religion and world government are the two most difficult things to bring about.
And there are people right now that are doing things to make it look like we are in the last days. Like you said in our last interview, that people would speed up this time if they could.
Yes. And they're trying to. They can't. God has ordained it to happen at a certain point in time, and there's nothing they can do, but they just keep working at it. They'll ensure it comes about, because once the restrainer is moved, everything will be fulfilled. There is no doubt about that.
Lots of chaos.
Lots of chaos. And so all we can look for now is how these events that are taking place is trending directionally to make sure that the landscape is completely fulfilled. And one of the things is Persia for the Magog War. Well, at some point in time, Iran has to have full control over Iraq. Well, we see that trending in that direction. And we need to see a relationship develop with those countries that take part in the Gog War and who those countries are. And we see that with Germany rising, and Germany will separate from the European Economic Union, in my mind, to create two of the great end-time empires, and they will trade more with Russia as they go. And so all of these countries are just sort of reshaping themselves geopolitically for the last move. And one can make an argument, well, it's all there today, but it's not perfectly accurate at this point.
That's right. Well, Gary, we're at the end. I want to ask you, is there anything that you would like to say that we haven't covered?
Only that, even though we've had 3 shows, if anybody thinks that we've covered everything in the book, we haven't. We're just talking at the superficial level on so many of the categories, and so you're going to learn about all of this and so much more. So no, I think the interviews have covered a lot. It's hard to know what we may or may not have covered, but I think people get the gist of how all of this works together, that you've got a combination of the mystical religions, the knowledge and the science, the secret organizations, the bloodlines of the Nephilim, all coming together to try and enslave humankind and to diminish our numbers in a way that is unthinkable, and for them to rule over us and to rebel against God. I think we've covered that off in so many different aspects that I think it actually might make sense to some of the audience at this point in time.
It's been very interesting. Would you please share with everyone how they can purchase your book and they can get in contact with you?
Yes, so I'm on Facebook, so just look for me under Gary Wayne, and I have 2 pages on there, the Genesis 6 conspiracy pages. You can also get a hold of me through my website. My website is www.genesis6conspiracy.com. My book is available off the website, and there's also connections off the website to Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And if somebody wants a personalized copy from me, that's available to order on the website as well. It's also, the book is available through all online book retailers. If you're looking to buy it from your Christian retail store, they may or may not have it on the shelf, but if they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it, because Send the Light Distribution markets the book to all the Christian bookstores in the United States and in Canada.
And I will have a direct link up to Gary's site, the Genesis6conspiracy.com, with tonight's broadcast, so you'll be able to click on that and go directly to Gary's page. Gary, it has been such an honor and such an enlightening experience to be able to interview you, and I would like to tell you thank you so much for giving me this chance.
Well, and thank you. I think it's been 3 terrific shows. I hope the audience feels the same way, but I know we've covered a lot of things, and hopefully, a lot of things that people haven't thought about. So thank you for having me on, and bring me back anytime that you'd like. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yes, I've enjoyed it too. And just to let the audience know, I have talked with Gary, and he will be a recurring guest off and on the Deception Detection radio show, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to go ahead and say tonight's closing prayer, and then we'll wrap it all up. Are you ready, Gary? Okay.
I am.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for tonight and for the last 3 weeks. Your word has came through so strongly with what Gary has shared with us. It helps us to understand what you want us to understand and know. And I pray that it has touched our listeners in the same way, that it will also give them a hunger to learn more, Lord, about your word and just exactly what the devil is trying to do right now to take us away from what you truly said, to try to get us to believe what he wants us to believe. And Lord, we want to follow you. You are who we have our eyes on. You are who we want to walk with. You are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And we love you so much, Lord. And we want you to make sure and use us in the way that you feel that we can benefit you, to glorify you, Lord. That is why you put us here on earth, and that is to glorify you. And everything that is done is for our good and your glory. Please look after my listeners during this week. Bless them. Please bless Gary as he is writing another book. Protect him and his family in their daily walk, and the people that are listening. Keep that hedge of protection around them, Lord. I know that you're going to do that, and you're going to keep them safe, and you're going to make sure that nothing evil can penetrate that. Thank you again, Lord. In Jesus' holy and mighty name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, well, that's going to do it for this week, everyone. Please tune in next week. Good night, everyone.